Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to our English podcast for Brazilians. I'm Jess Article, your host and teacher. Today, I want to tell you a story about work, fear, assumptions, and one moment that changed everything. The title of today's story is I Thought My Boss Hated Me Until I Learned the Truth. This is the kind of story that starts in a very ordinary place, a small office, a gray building, the same desk every day, the same computer, the same coffee, the same routine. And yet, sometimes the biggest turning points in our lives begin in the most ordinary places. So get comfortable, imagine an office with cold lights, quiet tension, and one boss who always looks angry. And let's begin. I used to work in a small office in the city. Every morning, I woke up early, got dressed in a hurry, and took the bus downtown. I always arrived a few minutes before 8. I liked being on time. It made me feel organized, responsible, in control. At least on the outside. Inside, I felt very different. Inside, I felt stuck. My life was not terrible. That is the strange thing. Nothing dramatic was happening. I had a job, I had a desk, I had a salary, I had a routine. But every day felt exactly the same, and deep inside, I had this quiet feeling that my life was becoming smaller and smaller. I would walk into the office, put my bag under the desk, turn on my computer, and make a cup of coffee that was never really good. Then I would open my email inbox and look at the same kinds of messages, the same deadlines, the same requests, the same small office problems that somehow always felt urgent. And there was one person who made everything feel heavier. My boss. His name was Mr. Brown. He was the kind of man who made people sit a little straighter when he walked by. He was not loud, he was not dramatic. In some ways, that made him more intimidating. He spoke in a short, dry tone. He rarely smiled. He moved quickly. He always looked busy. And whenever he asked me for something, it sounded less like a request and more like a test. Jess, I need this by noon. Jess, did you send that file? Jess, come to my office. No warmth, no softness, no how are you, no thanks, just pressure. At least that's how it felt to me. And once you start telling yourself a story about someone, your mind begins collecting evidence. If he passed my desk without smiling, I thought, see, he doesn't like me. If he corrected something in my report, I thought, of course, I'm never good enough. If he gave me extra work, I thought, why me? Why always me? Little by little, without even noticing it, I built a complete story in my head. My boss was cold, my boss was unfair, my boss did not respect me, my boss probably thought I was incompetent. And the worst part is that I believed the story so strongly that I stopped questioning it. Every time I had to walk into his office, my heart would beat faster. I would stand outside the door for 1 second, take a breath, knock softly, and say, "Excuse me?" He would answer in that low, serious voice, "Yes, come in." His office always felt colder than the rest of the building. There were papers everywhere, a large monitor on the desk, files stacked in corners, and a wall calendar filled with meetings written in dark ink. It looked like the office of a person carrying too much responsibility and not enough time. But I didn't see it that way then. At that time, I only saw a man who made me nervous. Sometimes he gave me work at the last minute. Sometimes he asked me to fix something twice. Sometimes he explained things too quickly. Sometimes he looked impatient. And because I was already insecure, I translated every expression on his face into rejection. I went home tired almost every day. Not physically tired, emotionally tired. There is a special kind of exhaustion that comes from believing you are constantly being judged. On the bus ride home, I would stare out the window and replay conversations in my mind. Why did I say that like that? Did I sound stupid? Did I make a mistake? Is it disappointed in me? By the time I got home, I was mentally drained. One evening, I was sitting on the bus, still wearing my office clothes, holding my bag on my lap, and I felt tears in my eyes. Not because of one big event, but because of everything. The routine, the pressure, the feeling of not being enough, the sense that I was living a smaller life than the one I wanted. And I remember thinking very clearly, almost like I was talking to myself from a distance. If I want a different life, I need different skills. That thought stayed with me. A different life, different skills. For me, one of those skills was English. I already knew some English, not perfect English, not impressive English, just enough to read simple emails, understand some videos, and say a few things when necessary. But I knew something important. English represented possibility. A better job, more confidence, bigger opportunities, a version of myself that felt less trapped. So I started paying more attention to it. At first, it was small things, a few phrases, short videos, listening practice, repeating sentences quietly when no one was around, reading email structures, learning expressions for meetings, trying to understand how people actually communicated. I didn't tell anyone. It felt private, personal. I was building something, even if I didn't fully understand what it was yet. Then, one Monday morning, something happened that changed the energy of the whole office. At 9:07 a.m., an email arrived from Mr. Brown. It was sent to the entire team. The subject line said, "Urgent, meeting at 4 p.m." My stomach dropped. Urgent meetings are almost never good news. Within minutes, the atmosphere in the office changed. You could feel it. People started whispering. Some looked at each other over their screens. Others checked the company chat. One person stood up and went to the printer, not because they needed anything, but because people always need to move when they are anxious. Nobody said the worst thing out loud at first, but it was there. Hanging in the air. Layoffs, problems, budget cuts, a client crisis. By lunchtime, everybody had theories. Maybe we lost the account. Maybe the company is being sold. Maybe our department is changing. I tried to focus on my work, but it was impossible. Every hour felt longer than usual. Every email notification made me nervous. Every time I saw Mr. Brown walking by, he looked even more serious than normal. At 3:55, we all walked into the meeting room. The room was quiet in that unnatural way people get quiet when they are worried. Mr. Brown was already there, standing, hands on the table, serious face as always. A few seconds later, a video call started on the screen. Someone from another country joins the meeting. A senior partner maybe, or a client. I wasn't sure. Then Mr. Brown began speaking in English. At first, I was surprised. I had never really heard him speak English before. And then I noticed something else. He did not sound confident. He sounded tense. He repeated words. He paused too long between sentences. He started a sentence, then stopped and changed it. He misunderstood a question and asked for it again. He smiled nervously once, but it was the kind of smile people use when they are trying not to show embarrassment. And then I saw it. Fear. Real fear. Not anger, not arrogance, not coldness. Fear. For the first time, I was not looking at my boss as my boss. I was looking at a human being trying very hard not to fall apart in front of other people. That moment shook me because in my mind, he had always been the strong one, the powerful one, the difficult one, the person who created pressure. But there he was, clearly uncomfortable, clearly insecure, clearly trying to hide it. The call ended after what felt like forever. Mr. Brown thanked everyone. People started leaving the room, chairs moved, papers were collected. The room slowly emptied. I stood up too. Then I heard his voice. Jess, can you stay for a moment? My heart started racing immediately. My old story returned in 1 second. Great, now I'm in trouble. I sat back down. The door closed behind the last person. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then he looked at me, and his expression was different. Still serious, yes, but not hard. More tired than hard. He took a deep breath and said, Jess, your English is good, right? I blanked. I honestly did not know what to say. No one had ever asked me that at work before. And definitely not him. I mean, I said carefully, I can communicate. He nodded slowly. Then he looked down at the table for a second, almost as if he was deciding whether to continue. When he looked up again, his voice was lower. Jess, he said, I'm afraid of English. I just stared at him. Out of all the things I expected to hear in that room, that sentence was not one of them. He gave a short, awkward laugh, but there was no humor in it. I can read most emails, he said. I can understand some meetings, but speaking is very hard for me. He paused. Then he said something I will never forget. When I speak English, I feel stupid. The room was completely silent. And in that silence, something inside of me shifted. Because I knew that feeling. I knew exactly what he meant. That helpless frustration of knowing you were intelligent in your own language, but feeling reduced in another one. That fear of sounding less capable than you really are. That pressure of wanting to say something clearly and not being able to do it fast enough. I knew it. And suddenly, I wasn't sitting across from a villain. I was sitting across from another adult carrying shame. He rubbed his forehead and looked exhausted. That's why I'm always stressed before international meetings, he admitted. There's more pressure now, more communication with foreign clients, more expectations, and I know my English is not where it should be. Then he looked directly at me. I need someone on my team who is not afraid to speak English. I felt my throat tighten. Not afraid? That was not how I saw myself at all. I had never thought of myself as confident in English. I only thought I was less afraid than some other people. But sometimes that is enough. And I think, he said slowly, that person could be you. I was so shocked, I didn't answer immediately. Me? The employee who spent months assuming he disliked her? The employee who went home feeling small? The employee who thought her English was still not enough? He must have seen my surprise because his tone softened. You communicate well, he said. Maybe not perfectly, but clearly, and that matters. Maybe not perfectly, but clearly. I wish I could explain to you how powerful that sentence was for me in that moment. Because I had spent so much time focusing on what I lacked that I never noticed what I already had. I had clarity, I had courage, I had willingness. And apparently, in the real world, those things mattered more than perfection. That conversation lasted maybe 10 minutes, but it changed the way I saw him, myself, and my future. From that week on, things started to change in small, unexpected ways. We began meeting once a week before international calls. At first, it was very simple. I helped him prepare phrases for meetings, useful expressions, simple structures, ways to ask for clarification, ways to buy time, ways to sound more natural and less anxious. We practice things like, could you repeat that, please? Let me rephrase that. I'd like to add something. That's a good question. Can we go over that again? Very basic things, really. But basic things become powerful when they solve a real problem. At the beginning, he was still very tense. He would stop mid-sentence and say, "No, that sounds terrible," or "I can't say that naturally," or "They're going to notice my accent." And for the first time in my life, I found myself saying to someone else the exact things I needed to hear too. You don't need to sound perfect. You need to be clear. You need to keep going. You need to practice under pressure, not just in theory. Something else changed too. He started listening to me more, not only about English, about work, about ideas, about projects, about improvements I thought we could make in the office. The man I once saw as distant and impossible started treating me with the kind of respect I had never felt from him before. And maybe the most interesting part is this. He had not changed overnight. I had, or rather, my interpretation had. I had built an emotional story around his behavior without knowing the full truth. Yes, he was stressed. Yes, he was difficult sometimes. Yes, he could be abrupt. But he was not the person I had imagined. He was not against me. He was carrying pressure I could not see. And this is something life teaches us again and again. People often look the strongest exactly where they feel the weakest. Weeks passed, then months. His English improved. Not dramatically, not magically, but noticeably. He spoke more in meetings, he paused less, he asked for help when he needed, he prepared, he practiced. And because of that process, I improved too. My own English became stronger, my confidence changed. Not because I became perfect, but because I started using English with purpose. Not just as a student, as a professional, as a person with something to say. One afternoon, after a meeting had gone especially well, Mr. Brown stopped by my desk. He looked down at a file in his hand, then back at me almost casually. "You know," he said, "you have talent for this." "For what?" I asked. "For teaching," he said. "You explain things clearly, you make people feel less nervous. That's rare." Then he gave a small nod and walked away like he had just commented on the weather. But I stayed still for several seconds because that sentence landed somewhere deep. You have talent for this. At the time, I did not fully understand what that sentence would mean in my life. I only knew that it stayed with me. It followed me home. It returned to me on the bus. It appeared in my head when I was washing dishes, checking emails, walking to work. You have talent for this. Sometimes one sentence becomes a seed. And that sentence was one of the seeds of everything I do today. Looking back now, what amazes me most is not that my boss had a secret. It is that I had one too. His secret was that he was afraid of English. My secret was that I was more capable than I believed. He thought English exposed his weakness. I thought English exposed mine. But in the end, English exposed something else. Potential, growth, direction, a door. That office was not where my life ended. It was where my life began to turn. Not because everything became perfect. Not because my boss transformed into a warm, smiling movie character. Not because suddenly I had no fear. No, the turning point was much quieter than that. It happened the moment I understood that the people around me were human and that my own imperfect English already had value. That realization changes the way you walk into a room. It changes the way you speak. It changes the way you see opportunity. So if you're listening to this story and thinking, I also feel stuck, I want you to hear this very clearly. Sometimes the story you were telling yourself is incomplete. Sometimes the person you think is judging you is struggling too. Sometimes the skill you think is still too weak is already strong enough to open a new door. And sometimes your English does not need to be perfect to change your life. It just needs to be alive, used, practiced, tested, spoken. Because fluency is not born in perfection, it is born in contact, in repetition, in courage, in real moments, in awkward conversations, in trying before you feel fully ready. That is where confidence is built. That is where identity starts to change. That is where your English stops being something you study and starts becoming something you use. And that is the moment everything begins to move. So, ladies and gentlemen, I discovered the truth about my boss. But much more importantly, I discovered the truth about myself. I was not as powerless as I thought. I was not as unprepared as I believed. And the English I once called not enough was already powerful enough to change my direction. If you're already at an intermediate level, if you've tried everything but you still feel stuck when it's time to speak, I have a structured path to help you finally unlock your English speaking faster. Click the link below in the description and come study with me. Thank you for listening and see you in the next podcast.